scared of time management?
Yes. Yeah, you say time management. I don't know, although everybody thinks I need it, so I don't know. So. All right, well, welcome. Thanks for being here. Any wins or successes? Yes,
Okay.
you should.
I have my first house under contract.
Woohoo!
Which I feel like I really earned because I sprained my ankle pretty badly while I was showing properties to them.
Oh man.
But and then it almost fell through for like overnight. Now we're good. We're all good, and they're happy. And yes, so
It's awesome.
it's really
So
exciting.
cool.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's exciting. So awesome. Anyone else? Win or successes, Parker?
What class is this? I need to make sure.
Activities management. I think I put you on the email for it. Did you get an email yesterday or no?
No.
Then you probably don't.
Okay. Well, success is that I was here. So.
Thanks for being here. Yeah. If you didn't get an email yesterday, then you
All
don't
right.
need it. So, okay.
I got first buyers broker agreement signed
Nice.
and then a referral contract as well.
Awesome. Good job.
Yay.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Cool. Good job. Well, good. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. I guess you're up, Jeff.
I'm up.
There's Parker.
I'm not good at remembering faces. Last Thursday when I came in, we talked about credit. And of you who were here, I want to kind of continue on that because it's such an important aspect of getting people borrowed, getting people approved, not just from the standpoint that they actually buy the house, but the higher your credit score is, the better off your terms are. I mean, it's a huge advantage when you're not using FHA. FHA really doesn't care once you get 620 or above. Conventional, it's tied to every 20 points, you get a little bit better interest rate, all the way up to 760. It's the very highest. So when you have people on the fence, they say, well, I haven't done anything yet because we're not sure. We really need to get working on their credit to improve their position to buy sooner the better. And one of the reasons why is one of the things that we do with people is we put authorized users on their credit, which means like if your mom and dad have a great, talk to your client, your mom and dad or somebody related to you has a great record, they can actually go up and call up that lender and say, put my son, daughter, whoever on this account. That will show up on your account as if you've had the same history as they have had for that account. In many cases, that will take their credit score and bump it 20, 30, 40 points, which is huge. It can be the difference between buying or not buying, or the difference between a better interest rate or not. The one thing to be aware of, because people they'll drag their feet on this, most of the time we can make changes to a credit report and do what's called a rapid rescore, and they'll go through and make the immediate changes and reflect the changes to your FICO score. Authorized user accounts cannot do that. It goes through the normal billing cycle. It can be 30 to 45 days. So if someone's trying to do it quick when they just put a contract in place and they want to raise their score, we will not be able to do that with that particular lease. So all of these things just fall into that category of anybody sitting on the fence go, look, whatever you do, get yourself pre-approved to buy this house. Because when something comes up, I'm going to call you about this fantastic house I found. You need to be able to move right now. So it gets people kind of moving their feet, and we will actually help you move them towards the buying mode, and we'll push you as the best realtor in the whole world. So it's really a good team effort to make sure you have someone on your side, making sure that they're ready and willing and able to buy. Any questions? No. Okay, hope you have questions for him. Because this is, what'd you call it again?
Activities
management. Well, I'm going to go manage some of my other activities.
You can go manage your own.
Is this where we learn to manage the cruise ship activities or
Yeah, that's
the cruise ship activities?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Russ is your cruise director.
I'm the cruise director.
I love it. Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
All right, so any questions before we get going today? No? Okay. Well, we're going to get going then. So here's what we're going to do today. So today, the idea of this is activities management, which is kind of a sly way of saying time management, which we're going to talk about. But I'm going to approach this in a different way than probably if you've been to time management classes before or anything like that. I'm going to approach it a little bit differently because I want you to understand the issues and things that are involved with time management. And then we're going to talk about scheduling and helping you put that together. And I'm going to actually give you a formula as a way for you to keep track of your time that you're working in real estate so that you can know how productive you are being with your time. And I'll show you what that looks like. So, but here's where I'm going to start with. So let me get this projector turned on here. I want to start with, we're going to talk about this guy. I'm going to share with you a couple of principles. We're going to talk about a couple of principles, and so I think it'd be easier to see if we shut the lights off. So I'm going to tell you a couple of principles by this guy by the name of C. Northcott Parkinson, which I don't anticipate any of you have heard of him before. Has anybody heard of him? I didn't expect you would. But so this guy by the name of C. Northcott Parkinson, he actually was in college in 1930. So it was around 1930 that he is working on his PhD thesis. And in the process of doing that, he did a study of the naval shipyards in the port of Southampton. So and what he was studying was the Royal Navy. So he took a look at the Royal Navy and he was studying what they were doing. And I'm going to show you part of the study here in a minute. But the reason why I want to show you this is we're going to talk about a couple of laws that he's come up with. So what are called Parkinson's laws. The first one is what's called the law of expansion. So what it says is this, is that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So he was working on his PhD thesis. He's studying the ships in the port of Southampton and studying what was going on with the Royal Navy around that time. And during the process of this study, he came up with these principles, the first one being work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So what does that mean? Work expands to fill the time available for its completion.
If you say, I have to have this ditch done by Friday, it will take until Friday.
Perfect. That is exactly right. So
You could finish it today, but it's going to take.
yeah, if you decide, yeah, that's right. Is what he found is what tends to happen is that if we give ourselves a deadline, whatever it is, we will usually find work to keep us busy until that deadline. So said another way, if you were to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go show up to the office and work until 5 o'clock today, work will expand to fill the time it's for you to work until 5 o'clock. So time spent on work is not necessarily productive. So there's a difference between being at work and being productive and just being at work is really what he's saying. Is work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. So that's the first thing he found. Now, so this is what he found. So how he came up with that is in studying the Royal Navy, he looked at, and what happened is in 1914, he found that the Royal Navy had 62 ships in commission. So in their Navy, there were 62 ships. On those ships were, as far as officers and men that were working in the Royal Navy, there was 146,000 men serving on those ships. Dockyard workers, there was 57,000, and then dockyard officials and clerks, which when I say dockyards officials and clerks, so meaning like supervisors, and then the Admiralty there was 2,000. So that's what was happening in 1914. Now remember, this is 1930 he's studying this. 1928 he notices the number of ships that they had in the Royal Navy had decreased, so it had gone from 62 down to 20, so it had decreased 67%. The officers and men in the Royal Navy went from 146,000 to 100,000, down 30%. Then the dockyard workers, though, notice what happened. So the number of ships goes down, but the number of dockyard workers went from 57,000 up to 62,000. And then the officials and clerks went up from 3,200 to 4,500, and the Admiralty officials from 2,000 to 3,500. So the ships are down 67%, but yet the bureaucracy, the upper management, increased 120%. So why would that happen? Why? Now, here's the thing. When you understand this, it'll help you understand what goes on in your world as well. Because why would that happen? Why would the number of ships decrease, yet that increase? I mean, clearly, when I say that, clearly what happened between here and here in the world? Like, why was there 62 ships?
World War I.
Yeah, so the war's over, like, they don't need that many ships. So clearly that's why this went down. But why, when that goes down, would then the upper management expand?
they may have plans to get back.
Okay, could be. So typically, and I don't know for sure that this is, but what if you pay attention in any organization? So this happens in your business, which we'll talk more about that probably next week. As far as like your business, meaning like you should approach this real estate thingy as like it's your business, not like it's a thingy. Like meaning like people say like, oh, I got to go get a real job. Like if you treat this like a real job, it will pay the bills better than a real job. So. But what goes on in any organization is if it is not managed, work expands to fill the time available. Meaning, what happens in any organization is somebody will have an idea. You know what we ought to do? We ought to create a blah, blah, blah. And because of that, we need somebody to go manage that job now. And so we go hire. So what happens? Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Meaning that what happens is they look at it and they start creating jobs that weren't really necessary, and you will do the same thing in your real estate career if you're not careful, is you'll start to create these jobs for yourself, meaning things for you to do that are not really productive and going to get you paid. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So that's the first principle. So the first principle is work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Now, the other thing he found as he was studying them, the other thing that he looked at was he was studying all of their meetings that they had as well. And in studying their meetings, what he found was this, is that the time spent on any item of the agenda, so what in looking at their agendas for the meetings that they had, the time that they would spend on any item of the agenda would be in inverse proportion to its importance. So what does that mean?
You're going to focus on the least important things in the time they have.
Perfect. So keeping in mind, work expands to fill the time available. And what he found is that they tend to then work on and talk about the least important things first and the most important things least and last. So what he found was this was his law of trivialities, and we all do this as well. And I'm going to give you an example of it. But time spent on any item of an agenda. So said for you in terms of real estate, the time that you spend at work will typically you will spend the most amount of time on the least important items and the least amount of time on the most important items. Okay, so let me show you what that looked like. Whoa, so first actually. So the third principle. So the first two were by C. Northcott Parkinson. The 80-20, you've all heard of the 80-20 principle before. Where that came from was a guy by the name of Vilfredo Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto, so it's really, the actual term for this is the Pareto principle, but he was an Italian economist, and what he found was that 80% of the production would come out of 20% of the factories. And so that's where this 80-20 was. He was studying that. He found that 80% of production would come out of 20% of the factories. Well, so the same thing happens with you, is 80% of our time will be spent on activities that only make a 20% contribution to our business. And we will spend 20% of our time on the activities that would make an 80% impact. So on a graph, this is what that looks like. So it's basically saying if these two items, so there's 10 items here, if these two were the most important items and going to generate the highest income to you, you will spend the least amount. This red line is the time that you spend on it. So you'll notice we spend the least amount of time on the most important things, and the most amount of time is spent on the very least important things. So this, basically what we're talking about is this is what tends to happen with all of us in terms of our work, is work expands to fill the time available for its completion. When we're at work, part of what that problem is, we spend 80% of the time on the least important things, and 20% on the things that generate 80% of our income. So if we can understand that and manage that, then we can put ourselves in a position to be very successful. Okay, so let me give you an example of this, so to show you what this looks like. So what I'm going to share with you now is a study that was done in the Wall Street Journal. So what they had done is they had done this study on the Boston School District. And as they were studying this, I'm not going to tell you the name of the study because it'll give away part of what I'm going to talk about. But I'll give it to you at the end. But they had done this study, and then they reported about what they had found in the Wall Street Journal. But they were studying the Boston School District. Now, here's what they saw: is the Boston School District was having a meeting. So before we get too far, let me make sure you guys are all on the same page. The Boston School District's going to have a meeting on the school board. Now, who makes up the school board? Who are the people that end up on school boards? Okay, and where do they come from? So, and typically, who's most interested in that?
Educators, parents.
Yeah, it's educators, but a lot of times it's the parents that want to get involved and they do PTA or whatever, and then they move on to now being involved and become on these school boards. Okay, so what they were studying is, okay, you've got this school board that is doing a meeting. On this meeting, there were 2 items on the agenda. So this was a 1-hour meeting. They were going to have 2 items. The first item on the agenda, there were 2 items. This was not the first item, this was the second item. Of the 2 items, the first one was a $1.5 million annex. They were looking at building a new building, basically. So they were going to spend $1.5 million on that. The second item that they had, which actually was the first item, I probably should reverse those, but was a $200,000 item. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that is just yet, but I will tell you. So, in this 1-hour meeting, what happened is they spent 57.5 minutes talking about this item. Sorry, I'm reversing it. The $200,000 item. Now, the difference between the high bid and the low bid on this $200,000 item was $10,000. So they're talking about a $200,000 item, and the difference between paying the highest price and the lowest is like $10,000 or $20,000. I mean, very minimal. But then they were going to also be talking about this $1.5 million annex. The difference, they had bids that they were reviewing. They were going to be choosing who are we going to have build this building. The difference between the high bid and the low bid on this one was $200,000. So they've got 2 bids, one of them being $200,000 higher than the other one. This item, the difference between the high and the low bid was like $10,000, so very minimal. Now, they spent 57.5 minutes so it's a 1-hour meeting. They spent 57.5 minutes discussing this item. They spent 7.5 minutes, the meeting ran over, so they spent 7.5 minutes discussing this one. Now, in the 57.5 minutes that they spent discussing this $200,000 item, and remember, the difference between the high and the low bid is $10,000. They chose the low bid. So they saved $10,000. They then spent 7.5 minutes discussing those 2 items, the 2 contracts, to build this building, and they chose the higher. So they spent an extra $200,000 here, but they saved like 10 or 20 there. Now, here's the question. What do you think they were discussing for 57.5 minutes to save $10,000? What would you guess?
School books.
Paper products.
So yeah, simpler than that. When you say paper products,
Well,
that is exactly what it was. I'm impressed. I don't think I've ever had anybody guess that. But yeah, so they what's behind
Ivermectins.
toilet paper.
And I didn't know that. I just guessed.
They spent 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper so they could save $10,000. Then they spent 7.5 minutes and took the high bid of there. Now, here's the thing. This is where this can be eye-opening. Why did they do that? Why did they spend 57.5 minutes and go with the low bid and 7.5 and go with the high bid? Why do you think they would do that?
Maybe just we're going to be using toilet paper on a daily basis. They thought it was more important. I don't know.
You're on the right track. Dustin?
Well, I think it's kind of the opposite. I mean, maybe they thought it was silly to spend $10,000 on toilet paper. And,
Okay. Well, that we're now getting to why the meeting took why they spent 57.5 minutes on it is because what? How familiar are you with toilet paper?
very,
Yeah, intimately, right? Yes. Now, so here's the question for you. If you have spent money in the last year on purchasing toilet paper, raise your hand. Okay. Now, if you have spent in the last year $1.5 million of your own money trying to, buy something, raise your hand. See, we just landed on what the issue is. The reason we can spend 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper is why? Yeah, we understand it. We're familiar. The reason they didn't do this is because remember, who makes up the school boards? Mostly it's just parents of the students and educators who are not versed in building buildings. They don't understand earthquake codes and all those things, which, and again, let's stop and think about it for a minute. If it's the parents and you're looking at, okay, we're going to build a building, what's the difference between the high and the low? What are the parents going to think? Yeah, if we go with the high, it's probably a better building to put our kids in. Yet we can argue about, yeah, it's toilet paper though, who cares? Like, we can argue for that, but on this, because they're not familiar with it, they're unfamiliar with it, they feel like, let's be safe and go with the high bid because we're probably going to get a better quality product at that. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the question for you. I'm going to put this back up here. So here's the question for you on that. What are the things for you in terms of real estate that you are most familiar with? Because here's the problem. Remember, I told you guys, in terms of your real estate career, you are going to fall into this trap. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion, and we work on the least important things first and longest, and the most important things last and least. So for you, though, and the reason you're going to do that is because exactly the same thing what we just talked about. The reason you will do that is because the things that you are familiar with is where you're going to spend your time. The things that you're unfamiliar with, you'll spend the least amount of time with. So what are the things in terms of real estate that would be the most familiar?
Your own home,
Okay, that's good. What else?
your SOI, your friends.
Okay, so well, let's talk. That should be, you would think, but how many of you tell the truth? Tell the truth. How many of you are afraid to call your SOI? Only one?
I don't have one.
I have no friends. I don't know it.
I've only been here a couple months in Utah.
Okay, well, let's assume you're not.
Yeah.
And assume you're not. You're back at home. Are you comfortable to call your friends and say, who do you know that I can help?
I don't have any friends in Tennessee either. So.
You don't have any friends anywhere?
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know. So who's for real? Who's afraid to call their sphere of influence because you're worried you're going to bug them? Only Barbara? She's the only one. Really? I'm impressed if that's true. That's great.
I'm a really annoying person anyway.
You what?
I'm a really annoying person anyway.
So you're okay with it?
I'm okay.
Okay,
with
good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's great. So, okay, good. So what other things, though, are we familiar? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to throw out that, I had some hesitancy when I first got back here, but I talked to Chris Ferguson and then Jeremy taught base camp, and that totally flipped
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
things for me.
Good. I'm glad to hear that because typically, my experience is most of the time, agents are afraid to call because they don't want to bug them, and so I'm glad to hear that. So go ahead.
For me, it's a lot easier if one of the internet leads doesn't answer the phone, but if one of my friends doesn't answer the phone, then it's like, man, I really wasted my time. Why did I do that?
Okay, good. Thank you. So, what other things are we familiar with? What are the things that you're not afraid to do in real estate?
Facebook.
Yeah, there you go. Facebook. What else?
For me, it's like, I used to do graphic design, so I can make like flyers. So I even remember like one day I just sat there and like, hey, I could have done something.
Yeah, we see that is the example. That's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of stuff we'll do. Is we'll go, well, I'm familiar with it. I know I can make a really cool flyer, and if I make a cool flyer, well, people are going to like that, and they're going to want to use me because I made a really cool flyer. Okay, good. What else? What are some other things that you're familiar with?
Instagram.
Okay,
Or
good.
social
Yeah, social media. Okay, good. Shannon?
I'm super familiar with like the nuts and bolts, the financing, the
Okay.
contracts, that kind of thing, but the computer end or the actual like dot loop, that kind of thing is the part that I
Okay.
don't know. I just don't know. I'm not as familiar as I should be.
Okay, good. What else? How about coming to class? Like, it's not scary to come to class, right? Which I'm not saying don't. Although, part of what you'll see here in a minute, like you're going to see, when I show you, I'm going to give you this formula. When you look at it, you're going to go, well, why am I in class then? But like, it still is important, meaning like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's just not productive. So, meaning, and so part of what I guess I'm saying when I say familiar, what are the things that you're comfortable with doing, but they don't pay you any money?
I like chatting with people on my team.
Yes, thank you. Like seeing it, like that's the number one that I see in every office I've ever been to is agents love to, hey, so how's it going? And do you want to go lunch today? And like we love to just, we're social people, and so we want to go socialize because that sounds better than getting on the phone, right? Okay, good. What else? Like, we probably about covered it. But.
I mean, just learning more about real estate. It's easy to, like you said, spend hours watching videos and old training videos.
Watching videos, jumping on the MLS. I got to learn how to use it.
I'm learning how to be a better real estate
Yeah.
agent versus
That's right.
going out and doing work.
Yep. We justify it as to, well, I need to do this. Which, again, I do want to say, like, don't hear me saying, like, we shouldn't sharpen our saw. Like, because I do also see the other side of that, and more so here than in any other company that I've seen, is typically agents love to come to class because we feel like we can go home feeling like we worked, but we weren't really productive in the work that we did. Versus I see a lot of times agents here don't come to class because they're like, well, no, I got to go work. I got to work. I got to go make the money. And which I respect that, but I also say there's the flip side of that of like the story that we probably all heard about the two lumberjacks going out to chop down wood, the old one and the young guy, and the young guy just takes off and starts just chopping, and the old guy sits down and sharpens his axe for like an hour, and then he goes and chops wood for a little bit, and then he sharpens his axe, and like you've got to take time out to sharpen the axe. So like don't hear that like you shouldn't be here because you should be here. So all right, what are the things though that you are most unfamiliar with? So what are the things that are least familiar? Because now remember, what I'm tying this to for you is we will tend to spend the most amount of time on the things that make the least amount of an impact in our business and the least amount of time on the things that will make the biggest impact.
Making phone calls to strangers.
Getting on the phone and calling for sale by owners, calling expireds, calling your internet leads, calling just listed or just sold, going door knocking. Like all of those things are the things we're least. Yeah, getting rejected.
Yeah.
Now notice, but yet, that is the piece that is going to make the biggest impact in your business, is if you'll do that. So notice that just what is going to happen. So as we talk about this time management stuff, keep in mind, work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Meaning, if you say, I am going to go to work until, and put a time on it, you will show up here and you'll be here for that whole time. But that is not the same thing as being productive that whole time you're here. And so I'm going to show you how you're going to keep track of that. That will help you with it. So that's the first thing. But then the other thing is related to that work expense to fill the time is we will spend the most amount of time on the least important things and the least amount of time on the most important things. Now, so here's where I want to go with this. Is I'm going to give you a formula that looks like this. So I sometimes will call this a tip analysis, or other times I'll call it a pin. So you'll hear me refer to it either way. So I'll even put it in parentheses. You can think of it this way too, as like a pin analysis. But I actually like tip better. Now, let me give you some understanding of this. So when I talk to you and I'm saying about that we work expense to fill the time available for its completion, and we work on the least important things first and most, and the most least important things most least and last. Did I say that right?
Most important thing.
Most important things least and last. The least important things most first and most. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So now let me show you what that means. When I first started and got my real estate license, I had gone to my broker and I had said, I've just always been the type that, like, I don't want to sit around and do nothing. So I would go to my broker and say, tell me what to do. Give me, like, what should I do? And he said, well, first go make a list of everyone you know and then come talk to me. So I went back and I sat down and I got, like, address books, phone, and actually back then I pulled out the phone book, was looking up all these people's fake names and phone numbers and addresses for all these people. Made the list. I went back to my broker and said, okay, here you go. And he said, okay, now, which I would still recommend you do this. Go write a letter that says, I've got my real estate license, and let them know, send them a few business cards. If they know of anybody thinking of buying or selling, to let you know. So I did. Mailed it out. Then I went back to him. Okay, now what should I do? And I think about this time he was getting tired of me coming and saying, what should I do? What should I do? So he finally just said, look, go door knock every day for 2 hours, and if you'll do that for 2 years, you'll never have to do it again. And I was like, okay, now I know what to do. And I went out and started door knocking. Now, for me, though, he also gave me, after that, I went to him and said, okay, like, help me figure out, though, because, like, I want to make $100,000. And he said, okay, here's what you need to do then. And he gave me this formula, which I'm not really a big believer necessarily in the formula he gave me. But what it landed on was he said to me, okay, you've got to make basically 50 contacts every day. If he said, because back then, based on our average sales price of what things were, was that I was making about $2,000 off of every commission check when I would close. And he said, well, so if you want to make $100,000 a year, his formula was you're going to have to do 50 closings, and to do that, you're going to have to do 50 contacts a day. So what he said, and to some extent, I think that part of it is correct. In, like, if you will on a daily basis do X number of contacts, you'll probably do that many transactions. So, but here's the point, though. He said, so go do 50 a day. Well, so I start knocking on doors, and I found that when he said go knock on doors for 2 hours, now this is over 20 years ago, but during that time, you could usually get in 2 hours about 25 contacts. So not quite, but you could get about 25 contacts. Well, I needed to get 50. So then what I decided to do is that I would go home, go home for lunch. I would eat lunch, because my house was like 3 or maybe 5 miles from my office. So I'd run home for lunch, then I'd go back to the office, and in the afternoon I'd get on the phone, and from 2 o'clock until about 4 o'clock I was calling, really basically until I could get my 50 contacts. So I would get my 50 contacts every day. Now, have any of you done 50 contacts in a day? How long did it take you to do it?
Well, it does speak to that work expands to time, so again, it was in the it was the whole day.
Okay, that's where I wanted to go. And the reason partially it does is because work expands to fill the time, meaning it's easy to take a break and go talk to somebody and chit chat or whatever. So, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But so part of what I'm saying to you is there is no correlation between hours worked and productivity. So just know that that is true. There is no correlation to the number of hours that you work and productivity. Meaning, I know of agents that will spend from sun up to sundown prospecting, or working, I should say, not prospecting, working. But if you really were to follow them around, you would end up saying, okay, yeah, you worked really hard, but that is not the same thing as being productive. So showing up early and staying here late is not the same thing as being productive. So for me, here's what I'm saying. And when I learned what we're talking about right now, this made a huge impact, and I'll say more about that. But I would show up every morning, I would get here at a certain time, and I would go home pretty much at 5 o'clock-ish every day. And I would go home feeling like, if I had gotten my 50 contacts in, I would go home feeling like I did my job. Like I should feel good about I did my job. But here's what I'll tell you. A year and a half later of doing this, I was nowhere near $100,000 a year in this business. Meaning I wasn't having the closings. I had replaced the income from my other job. Is probably what I had done. Is really where I was at. So I was doing okay, but that's not why I came into the business, was just to replace my income. I wanted to make a lot more. Now, when I met the guy that trained me in this, and he showed me this tip analysis, and what he asked me to do with it, and I'm going to ask you to do it as well. But when I did it, what I realized is, what I learned is, there is no correlation between work and productivity, meaning hours worked. The number of hours you work, you could show up and be here all 10 hours and not be productive. And now, I'm not saying doing 50 contacts is not productive, because it's a lot of work, right? I mean, it can take an entire day. But if your focus is on making 50 contacts, guess what you get? 50 contacts. And that's not what we're trying to do. That, if you make 50 contacts but you get no appointments, this is going to sound bad, but how productive was it?
Not very.
I mean, and I don't want to say it wasn't, because it still can be, but for me, what I changed in it, when I understood this, and instead of saying, okay, I have to work to get 50 contacts every day, I changed it to, what would be productive? Like, how could you measure a productive day?
Number of appointments?
That's where, yes. See, for me, once I understood that, because to some extent, this is good, but it's kind of work expanding to fill the time available for its completion. Meaning, if all I'm trying to get is 50 contacts, it can take a long time to get 50 contacts. So if that's my objective, how much time am I going to spend talking to Barbara to get an appointment? At least for me, not much.
30 seconds.
Yeah, because the faster I could get off the phone and get on to the next call was the faster I mean, like, I was like doing tick marks, like every day as I would make my contacts, I'm doing this, and my objective is I got to get through 50 of those, and I wanted to get through it as fast as I could, so I would do that, and then I'd go home and go, man, I worked really hard. I should feel really good about myself because I got 50 contacts. But I wasn't making the income that I wanted to make. And when I realized there's no correlation between hours worked and productivity through this tip analysis, then things changed for me. So one of the things that this guy asked me to do, and I would recommend that you guys do this, is he asked me, here's what I want you to do. So I was in a training similar to this. We were talking about this piece, and he said, if you want to have an eye-opening experience, and I'll tell you the same thing, if you want this eye-opening experience, do what I'm about to ask you to do. Is he said, for the next week, I would track every 15 minutes what you were doing. So what I did was this. So let's just say 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:30, 8:45, 9 o'clock. What I would do is, the watch that I had back then was a Timex Ironman triathlon watch, and it had a timer on it, to where I could have that timer go off every 15 minutes. So I just had set this watch, and every 15 minutes it'd go beep, 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 and then I could hit the button and it would reset it, and then it would start counting down again for 15 minutes. And so what I would do is, so I showed up, let's say, at the office at 8 a.m. When I got the office at 8 a.m., at 8:15 my watch would start to beep. And so when it beeped, I would stop and write down in this slot right here, what did I do during the last 15 minutes? So it would beep, I'd write down what I did. Then at 8:30, it would beep. I would stop, write down what I did. 8:45, beep, write it down. 9 o'clock, 9:15. And I would just write down, and at the end of the day, then, I would assign, and I'll show you what this looks like, either a PI or an N to it. And I'll explain what that looks like for you. But what you will find, here's what I'm telling you. So let me summarize it this way. I would guess, thinking about who's in this room, that if you were to do what I'm talking about here, which I'll explain, I would guess that in a week from now, if I had you track it for the next week, and then next week share with me what you had, what we would find is you guys would be between 7 and 11% productive. Meaning, of your hours that you work, you are only productive, and this might even actually be, with how new most of you are, this might even be high, might be really high to be that. Meaning, my experience is if we were to take the core of our agents, meaning not the top producers, but like the middle producing seasoned agents, we would find that of their hours worked, they're only productive 7 to 11% of the time. Now, what's that?
That's not very good.
Well, it's not, but at the same time, I would tell you if you are productive 7 to 11% of the time, I would tell you you're probably making a decent amount of money. Not, I wouldn't say probably like where your goal is, but I would say it's probably as good or better than a previous job that you had if you were just this productive. Now, here's what we have found is even the top agents are still only going to be, like, I would guess that if we were to look at our number one agent is down in St. George, Brian Burnett. He did $1.4 million in commissions last year. And I would bet if I were to follow him around and do this, we would find that his productivity, remember I said not productivity is not the same as hours worked. I would bet his productivity is around 33%. Now, if you stop and think about what I'm saying to you, what it looks like something like this. So imagine that I was drawing this out, it would look something like this. Meaning that on this curve, the further this way that you go, notice like a small increment here is a big increment there. What?
Just steep hockey stick.
Yeah, it's very steep. So meaning, if you doubled your productivity, your income is going to 4 or 5 or 6 times itself. It's not linear. Does that make sense? So as you become, which is why I would say to you, somebody making 60, 80,000, maybe even 100,000 a year is only productive that amount of time. Yet I'm telling you to go from there to 10 times that, meaning to over $1 million a year, you only have to improve your productivity 20%. So a small increase in your productivity leads to a huge increase in your income because it's that 80-20, the Pareto principle. Spending just a little bit more time makes a huge impact on it, okay? So now let's talk about this for a minute. So let me explain what this tip analysis and how this works for you. But I would highly recommend for you guys, if you want an eye-opening experience, create this every day that you're going to work. So the moment you clock in, for lack of a better word of saying it, start keeping track every 15 minutes, what did you do, and write it down. And then at the end of the day, you're going to assign, was it productive, indirectly productive, or non-productive? So now let me explain that. So let's talk about productive, indirectly productive, and non-productive. Okay? So what things would you say, what activities are the most productive things that you can do in this business?
Going on appointments.
Okay, so yes, give me like what type. So tell me what you mean. Okay, good. Yeah, so a listing appointment. Good. What else would be productive?
Showing homes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm going to say a buyer appointment because like a buyer to get them to sign a buyer broker or showing homes. Now the key on that of showing homes, I would say, is to somebody who has signed a buyer broker. If they haven't, in my mind, if they have not signed a buyer broker agreement, or the reason I draw a line up here, or at that meeting you're going to ask them to sign a buyer broker agreement, then I feel like that's not productive if they haven't signed the buyer broker. I would actually put it as indirectly, die. So what other things can we do?
Contracts.
Thank you. Yeah, think of it this way. When I'm saying productive, think about like an attorney. When an attorney they have what they call billable hours when they're working with the client. And so that's what I want you to think of, is this would be like our billable hours, meaning when we're doing this is where we really are making the money. So yeah, so writing or negotiating is probably a better way of saying that, negotiate contracts.
Closing, escrow.
And closing. Now,
Setting appointments, prospecting, those are also.
so good. So I like what you're thinking, but actually those are going to be indirectly productive. So I'm going to put prospecting here as being indirectly productive. And what I mean by that is this: if all you ever did was prospect, how much money? And let me even take it further than that. You prospect, but you don't get appointments. And why I say that is, back when I was doing this, I would prospect and get 50 contacts a day, but I wasn't getting very many appointments. And when I learned what we're talking about right now, I switched from 50 contacts to set 1 appointment every day. The moment I switched to that, of my job is to set an appointment and don't go home until you set an appointment, and I didn't, all of a sudden I got appointments it didn't take me 50 contacts to make an appointment. I could get an appointment really fast when that was what my focus was. Does that make sense? Because when I was trying to get to 50 contacts, it was all I could do to hurry and get through them as fast as I could. The moment I changed it to who cares how many contacts you make, it's all about how many appointments you set and hitting the goal of setting appointments. And once I do that, then I have been productive. Then is when my business took off. Now, the reason I say that, though, Dustin, on here, of why I would call it indirectly productive, is because under prospecting, there was another agent in my office that was doing this 50 a day, and he just couldn't get appointments ever. Like, he would try, but he just couldn't do it. And he would try and try and try. Like, if he would have said, I'm not going home till I get an appointment, he would have never gone, he would still not be home 20 years later. Like, he just could not get appointments. So that's why I say it's indirectly productive. Now, here's why I say that, too. Think about this as your billable hours. What do these things have in common?
Working with a
Directly serving.
Yeah, you are face-to-face with a client, but there's more to it than that. There's another, you're right on with that. That's a piece of it. There's another piece, though.
Involve commitment.
So, yes, say more about that, because you're exactly right.
They involve a commitment on the part of the client, whether they're
Yeah.
signing a contract, whether they're looking at houses,
Perfect.
or whether they're actually closing, they're committing to something.
Perfect. I go on a listing appointment. What am I expecting to happen at the end of the appointment? That they're going to sign with me. I go on a buyer appointment. What am I expecting is going to happen?
Signed by a broker.
I show homes. What am I expecting is going to happen at the end of that?
Submit an offer.
Write an offer. We're negotiating offers. What do I expect is going to happen?
Sign contract.
Closing. What's going to happen?
Get paid.
So what do these all have in common? We're face-to-face, and we're going to ask somebody to sign something. The objective is we're going to ask them to sign something. On a listing appointment, I'm going to ask them to sign something. On a buyer appointment, I'm going to ask them to sign something. I go show homes. I'm going to ask them to sign something. We're negotiating contracts. I'm going to ask them to sign something. We go to closing. I'm going to ask them to sign something. That's the reason that this is productive. In my prospecting, am I asking them to sign anything? No. What is the purpose of prospecting? To get this. That's why it's indirectly productive. So this is productive. Now, so let me start to tie this together for you. So when I said over here that if we tracked the time for you guys, I would guess a week from now, this would even be high to have you be 7% productive. And what I mean by that is, of your hours worked, how many hours are you spending doing this right now? And that's not a bad thing. In fact, what I want you looking at is it's going to be a good thing. But I also want you to see the correlation of just going from being 11% productive to 33% productive could take your income from $100,000 a year to over $1 million a year. So like it's not. A lot of times people feel like, oh, but to make $1 million a year, you got to work so hard. Not really. Like it's not that much. It's what you're doing is just saying the percentage of my time spent doing these items has to be a little bit higher. But doubling the amount of time you spend on this, your income's going to 5 or 6 times itself, or maybe even 10. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is the productive time. Now, this is the only indirectly productive is going to be prospecting. Really, I mean, unless you guys can think of something, but to this point, I've never been able to come up with anything else that would be indirectly productive.
Well, other lead gen, right? I mean, passive stuff is.
Yeah.
But
But to me, I would still lump that under that's
Okay.
prospecting. So, but yes, you're right. It's any lead generation, but I would, and we could list it for sure, but I would say that's just gonna fall under, that's prospecting.
Makes sense.
So, okay. Now, what then is non-productive? Now, before you start throwing out answers, let me make sure to point out. As we talk about the non-productive, don't be offended, because non-productive is not the same as not important. So meaning, you're gonna need to do some of this stuff. It is still important to do this. So I wanna be really, really clear, because as we start to talk about this, what I don't want you to do is leave here and be like, well, Russ said I didn't have, that it's non-productive and I shouldn't do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it might be non-productive, but it still could be, it's possible to still be important. Okay?
Peak agent training.
Thank you. Usually that one doesn't come up, but yeah, so training. Being here today, I hate to admit it, for me, it would be productive time. For you guys, non-productive. Meaning, and here's how I define non-productive, is if that's all you ever did, how much money are you gonna make? How much money are you gonna make, again, using the lumberjack? If he just sat all day long, sharpened his saw, and never went and used it, how productive is he gonna be? Not. Same with you. Training is important, but it is non-productive. So time spent in class is not going to be directly add to your income, meaning it is non-productive, but again, that doesn't mean not important. So don't everybody leave. Thank you
It's
for
not
not.
indirectly.
I would say it's not indirectly. And again, because the only thing I can think of that really is indirectly productive is your prospecting. That is
That's the only thing that leads directly to.
to appointments to do these. That's why. You got it. Yep. Okay, what else would be non-productive? Role playing, yeah.
Practice.
So again, this is why I spent so much time of don't hear that this is not important, because this is still important to do, but if all you ever did is role play, which I see a lot of this actually, let's role play, oh, I'm gonna role play, I'm gonna keep role playing, I just need to role play some more, I need to role play some more, and you role play, and you never make a prospecting call. That's why, Dustin, what you're saying is right on. You could role play all day long, but it's not gonna get you any appointments unless you do this. So that's why I say it's non-productive rather than indirectly. Okay? So what else would be non-productive? Again, doesn't mean not important.
Making flyers.
That's right. Flyers. Now, and you'll see why on some of this too in just a minute. What else?
Eating.
Yeah, going to lunch with another agent or whatever. That's non-productive. Still, we still gotta eat, but.
Chatting around the office.
Yep. Which we talked about, a lot of that goes on.
Going to events like Summit.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say events. Which again, if any of you don't go to Summit and you say, well, Russ said it was non-productive, you missed the point, because you still need to go, okay? So, but you get the point of this though, right? Okay, now let me ask you, what do these all have in common? So we talked about here what these all have in common. What do these have in common?
I feel like they
Increasing your
make us
knowledge.
better.
Okay, yeah, they make you better.
You benefit yourself personally.
But not all of these, like going to lunch and just chatting, like, is that gonna make you better? Like, if,
Lunch is gonna make you better for us.
well, maybe. But if
Depends
you,
on what you get.
yeah, that's what it depends on what you get, depends on what you talk about, like,
I think taking a break does make
absolutely. Like, I'm all in, you'll notice, here's what I wanna make sure. You'll notice I didn't say that this productive time, this is not gonna be 100% of your time. Could you imagine though, how cool it would be if your day consisted of this? I wake up every day and I just go from closing to closing to closing to close. Like, how much money would you make if you spent, let's just say you had worked for 8 hours and you went to 8 different closings every day?
Sign you.
I mean, like, could you imagine, like, that's what it would look like for you to be 100% productive. And clearly, like, your income would be humongous.
You can't do that.
Well, yeah, you can't. Yeah, I mean, you really can't. But
Because you have to do so much of the other to lead to that.
yeah, the only way you could, This could be possible, but what it would look like is basically of you running a team to where everything though was your business, and you had. This leads into where I'm going to go anyway. Is you're paying people to do this, you're paying people to do this, and you're paying people to do all of these, and you just show up for the closing and get paid. I mean, you could, but that's what it would have to look like.
Well, doing those other things are still 100% productive, right? Going on appointments.
Yeah, that's
showing
true. Yeah,
houses.
these ones aren't true. But I was just saying, imagine if you were only
doing closings.
going to closings every day, all day long, every day. Like your income would be like you can see it'd be humongous, right? So, okay,
It would be
Now-
$18 million based off of the average commission.
would it?
$18 million.
Thank you for looking that up. Now I'll know for the next time I teach it. So yeah, so notice going from $1 million to increasing that,
750,000.
doubling this would probably be 9 or 10 million, and then again it's going to go to 18. So interesting. Okay, all right. Now, so here's the thing that's interesting. So now let's talk about that. So actually do this. Take that 18 million and divide it by 2080, and tell me what it is.
9,000.
Okay, so if you did that, your hourly wage, if you were 100% productive going to just closings all the time, your hourly wage would be what?
$9,000.
$9,000 an hour is what you'd be getting paid.
Because the average income right now is, the average commission is around 9,000, right?
It's probably not quite that high here, but that's okay. Your income, you'd be making $9,000 an hour. Now, let me ask you this. So Barbara, since you brought up flyers twice today, if you were making $9,000 an hour, does it make sense to spend an hour making the flyer? What, seriously, if you were making $9,000 an hour, if I was going to pay you, I hired you and said, I'm going to pay you $9,000 an hour. Do you think I want you making a flyer for an hour? Why?
It's not productive.
Does it generate it?
Well, what would you do? If you're making $9,000 an hour and I came and said, I need a flyer. And so now your choice, Barbara, is go to a closing for an hour or make a flyer. What?
Make the flyer out.
At the closing? Okay. No, there's a better solution. What would you do?
Go to the closing, 'cause that's what's gonna make me money.
But I need a flyer.
Oh, well, if you were paying me anyways, then I would just make the flyer.
Well, no, but you're not going to make the $9,000 if you
Pay
don't go to
someone
the
else.
closing.
Oh,
What?
Pay
yeah.
someone else to
Pay
do it.
Thank
someone
you.
else to do it.
What do you think you could pay somebody to make that flyer?
$20.
$150 per a good designer.
How much?
$150.
Okay,
for a good
I'll give you
designer.
that, but we probably don't need that good of a flyer.
Yeah.
Like we
Put it
could
on
probably
the
get
bulletin.
away with what you guys were saying, which was probably $20 or maybe 30. We'll go 30. How's that? So stop and think about that for a minute. Here's now let me erase this because none of us are going to be doing that. But I will tell you, in tracking this is what you will find. You're going to make if you actually spent an entire year keeping track of your time like this, and you were to land on how much productive time you spent, meaning so take your income, divide it by the number of hours that you spent doing these items, what you are going to find is you make somewhere between $500 and $1,000 an hour. So today, my guess would be, so you got a deal that's going to close on the 22nd, your first one. How many hours do you think you spent with them doing these items?
6.
Okay, and so have they done inspections already?
No.
Okay, so you're going to maybe spend 10 hours.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I'm going back today. We're gonna go look at it again today. So.
So let's just
Let's say
hypothetically
10.
say you spend 10 hours. How much money are you going to make off of that?
4,800 after splits.
Oh, that's true, right? That's true with half. That's okay. So let's just say $5,000. Divide that into it is 500. So so stop and think about that. When you are out doing this, you're making $500 an hour. So when the option comes now, Barbara, for you to go, oh, I need to stop and make a flyer, stop and ask yourself, could I pay somebody $20 or $30 an hour so that I can then go and do this stuff and get paid $500? I mean, it's kind of crazy that like we even think about making a flyer ever, because if we understand this and go, you know what, if I could go spend that same time actually doing one of those things, I could pay somebody to do this.
But how are you supposed to get to those things if you don't do the flyer?
Great question. So glad you asked. You got to do this.
Well, I mean, I would consider a flyer a form of prospecting because you're getting your name out there.
Okay, and I understand where you're coming from, but if that's all you ever spent your time doing, are you really getting your name out there?
It's pretty passive.
It's very passive.
Well, and making the flyer isn't prospecting. Handing out the flyer is.
Correct.
You pay someone $20, you get 500, flyers for $20, $30, and then you don't have to spend the time making the flyer.
What I'm trying to say is that it's okay to have a flyer.
Oh yeah, it's okay. Yeah, please. Again, I'm not saying these things are not important. I'm just saying they're non-productive. So, and if you really understand this, you would look at it and go, it makes 0 sense for me to, tell the truth. How long did you spend on the flyer? Like the entire day?
No,
How much?
like maybe an hour. But
Okay, that's
the
not
reason
bad.
I brought it out so much is because I know I was doing it because I was procrastinating.
You were doing it as a way to not, to
Get
feel, we do it as a way to feel like I'm working.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's busy work. Like I went home, well, I had to make the flyer because I can't prospect. I can't go door knock without a flyer. I gotta have a flyer. Like that's how we justify it in our mind. When in reality, could you door knock without a flyer?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the problem is how we justify it, and we trick ourselves into, well, yeah, but people will think I'm like not a very good agent if I don't have a nice flyer. Like they're gonna think that you don't know what you're doing. Like. But I'll tell you, before I've driven before out to go door knocking and then realized I left the flyers on my desk. Most people would turn around and drive back to get the flyer. I just said, oh well, and I knocked on the door, and then people would say, do you have a flyer? And guess what I would say?
I left it on my desk.
Yeah,
Just went out.
and
I'll bring it back.
I'll be happy to bring you one. When would be a good time for me to bring it back to you? Do they want a flyer?
No.
No. Why do they ask for the flyer? To get you to leave. See how crazy this stuff is? Well, we make it up of, well, they want my flyer. They're gonna list with me because of my flyer. They're not gonna list with me because of the flyer. No, I hate to break it to you. Go ahead.
It's so funny that we're talking about this today because I this morning did spend a little bit of time looking at business cards because I don't have them yet, and I've been feeling like, man, I really need them.
How did you do a deal without business cards?
I know,
It's
right?
impossible.
I know.
We use, or my husband and I, we do like whenever someone asks, we say, "Oh, we do virtual business cards." So this
Yeah, we've gone green.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so I did look at them this morning, and I could have probably made like 5 more calls before class today. So this was pretty like.
It's good.
And I
Okay.
still haven't picked any.
Now, so now let me get to the next piece of this. So here's the thing. I asked you to start keeping track of your time. Now let me give you kind of the rest of the story on that. So I started tracking my time, and in the training that I was in, we were going to continue talking about it the next time, and so, but it was a week later. So the guy said, I want you to keep track every 15 minutes, and then, so what you do, so if let's say at 8 o'clock, from 8 to 8:15, I spent that 15 minutes looking up phone numbers. So I would write down looking up phone numbers. Which of these categories would that fit into?
None.
Yeah, non-productive. So then I would write down next to that an N. Okay? And then the next 15 minutes goes by, and let's say that I had started making calls, so that I was prospecting. So what's that? Aye. Then what happens though is an agent walks by, so I'll blame it on Luke. Luke walks by and says, hey, last night you said you were going to be going to see play or something. How was the play? And I put my phone down. Oh, it was so cool, blah, blah, blah. We sit and talk, and my watch, beep, 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 beep. So I reset it. Oh, sorry, I got to get going. So I write down in here, talk to Luke. What is it?
Productive. It was the most productive part of your day.
It was the most, non-productive. So do you see what's going on though? Now, so here's what happens though. So I'm doing that and I'm writing it down and I start tracking this. After a week of doing this, it had not been quite a week. So I started this, if I remember right, I started on Wednesday, started keeping track. So the week, I go through the weekend, Monday morning, now over the weekend I had gotten a new listing. So Monday morning now, I clock in, so to speak, and so I'm writing down what I'm doing. Well, one of the things that I would highly recommend you guys do, as soon as you get a listing, order from the title company a preliminary title report. You want to get that preliminary title report. So it's Monday morning, I've got this new listing, I need to order a preliminary title report. So I go walking over to the title company. Now the title company, picture it as like this was the office. There was a door like this that just, it was kind of more like a strip mall kind of a thing, but we had a back door that would open up into the title company. So I go walking over to the title company and I go over to the escrow officer, his name is Jeff. I go over to Jeff and I sit down with Jeff and Jeff's about my age and we have our each of us, our oldest is a boy and they're about the same age. So we have a lot in common. So I go walking over to Jeff and I'm like, hey Jeff, I got this new listing, here's the address, will you get me a preliminary title report? He says yes. And then he says, hey, so how'd your baseball games go over the weekend? And I go, oh, let me tell you about it. So we start talking. The whole time we're talking, beep, 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 and I reset. And we sat and talk. Beep, 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 reset. So I get done talking to him. I go walking back over to my desk. I walk into my office. I sit down at my desk, and I start to do whatever it was I was doing, and my watch beeps. Beep, 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 and I turn it off. And then I pull out my paper that has been sitting on my desk. So while I was at his office, I wasn't worried about writing it down in the moment because I just knew when I get back to my desk, whatever time it was when I left and when I get back, that whole time is going to be over talking to Jeff. So beep, 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 I'm sitting him down at my desk, it goes beep, 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 and I reset it and I pull out the piece of paper and this to me is where it changed my life. I pulled out the piece of paper and I had to write down order PR, which is end time. And then I had to write, talk to Jeff. Guess how long I was over talking to Jeff?
2 hours.
2 hours.
Oh my goodness.
But if I had not been tracking my time though, if I had not been writing it down, and I had gone home and you had said to me, how much time did you spend talking to Jeff? What do you think I would have said?
30 minutes. 30 minutes.
I bet I would have said 30 or 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Because I knew, like consciously, I knew I was pushing the button. But if I hadn't have been doing that and you'd said, how long were you over there talking to Jeff? I probably would have said, oh, about 45 minutes. But in reality, I spent 2 hours. Like for me, this is where this was life-changing, is because I had to write down in 15-minute increments for 2 hours, so 8 slots. I had to write down in. And I went, holy cow, like, and I stopped and asked myself, is that really what I want? No offense to Jeff, like he and I are still friends today. Like I've used him he is my title guy for the last 23 years. I went to lunch with him Friday. Like I'm still good friends with him. In fact, Judd, who is probably it's his brother.
Oh, cool.
So I love Jeff. But do I love Jeff to the point of like, if I have the option of spending 2 hours with Jeff or getting my work done, this is the example of work expands to fill the time available, like, but to the extreme. Of my 8-hour day that day, or whatever it was, I don't know, I spent 2 hours of it, and truthfully, probably if I had the sheet and went back and looked at it, it was probably even more than that. But 2 hours of it was non-productive, that was like, to some extent. What?
$2,000.
Yeah, if you thought of it that way, was that conversation worth $2,000? Like, would have I given up, because in essence I did, give up $2,000 to go talk to Jeff. Like, love the guy, not that much though. And honestly, if I would have said to him, this 2 hours actually cost him a deal too.
Sure.
Because I would have given it to him. So, like, he probably would have, if understanding that, me sitting there talking to him, he probably would have said, Michael, get out of here. Go. Don't be here. Now, so let me show you what this looks like. Think of this as like a timeline. This is going to be non-productive. This is productive time. This would be counterproductive. To some extent, like we didn't make a list of counterproductive, but to some extent, what I was doing with him was almost counterproductive. I mean, it wasn't, but so think of it as what we're trying. Anywhere time we spend on this line is not getting us anywhere. It's not making us any money. Now, can we just automatically just have, like, Dustin, are you on Alma's team? So
Yeah.
is Alma just right out of the gate, did he just go, okay, Dustin, I'm just going to schedule I'm going to sit here and make phone calls all day long for you to go on appointments?
No.
He didn't do that? You're kidding. Wow. What?
If that's the case, I should.
You're switching if that's
Right.
me
I
too.
should call.
If that's the case, I'm going there
Yeah.
too.
I'm gonna schedule 8 hours of closings.
My guess is, and I don't know, but it's probably more the other way around.
Right.
He's having you call to get appointments for him, right? Now he'll have you start transitioning into doing that, no question, which is great. But like, so my point being is like, you are never going to just start in this business and automatically be like you don't show. Although the public thinks this, that you show up here and that what's going to happen is that we just hand you here's a listing appointment. Go out and list these people's house. That's what your friends and family think. Is you show up here and we just go, here you go, Michael. Go out on this deal. Like, but that doesn't happen. So, meaning, we would love to, when I talk about this 100% on here, if we could just totally stay on that axis the entire time, would be awesome. But unfortunately, we can't do that. We have to do something that looks like this, that I like to call indirectly productive, which what's going to happen is we're going to go indirectly productive and then will lead us to productive time. Does that make sense? What I'm showing you there? So as you track your time, which I am telling you, like, I sometimes worry teaching this to, I know most of you are fairly new. I worry sometimes teaching this to you because you don't understand the power of what I'm giving to you right now. But if you will do this, if you will track your time and keep track of where am I spending my time, and every 15 minutes writing down, was it non-productive, indirectly productive, or when you're out on an appointment. Now, let me pause on this. When I was on appointments, I would shut my watch. I didn't have it beep every 15 minutes because I didn't, like, could you imagine on a listing appointment? I mean, to some extent, if you told them, hey, we'll only be 15 minutes, it would be good because you could, well, your time's up. I got to go to the next appointment. But I would shut it off. I didn't have it beep. Like, if you're out showing houses for 2 hours, you don't want your watch beeping every 15 minutes. So I would just shut it off, but I knew, hey, I just spent 2 hours with these people and we were out showing properties, so that's going to be productive time. Go ahead.
So you did that for just as long as you work like 8, 10 hours, whatever time you work?
Yeah, thank you. I did not keep track at night. So like, yeah. But yes, whatever I considered as like, okay, I'm working now, I would start keeping track of it. So for me, it was when I'm at the office, I'm tracking the whole time I'm there. What am I doing every 15 minutes? And write it down, and then assign a category. And it's only productive if you're face to face. Again, face to face where you plan to ask them to sign something. So for me, when I said if I was showing homes and I didn't have a buyer broker sign, I actually considered that prospecting. I'm still prospecting because I don't really. They're not a client. So unless I was going out if I was showing them property intending to get a buyer broker sign, then I'd count it. But if I went out there not intending to ask them to sign, you're still prospecting. That's not productive. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's what you want to do: is if you will keep track of this, this is very, very powerful because here's why. So what you want to do. So I told you over here this tip analysis. So in terms of that, I got to erase something. In terms of this tip analysis, let me explain how it works. So what you should do is keep track of the T equals your total time. So what you need to do is keep track of your total time that you're working. So that what you're doing is like, when you show up at the office, you know, okay, I'm here at 8 o'clock and I'm leaving at whatever, 6 o'clock. Let's do that just to make the math easy. So that day, my T or my total would equal 10 hours. Okay? Then at the end of every day, you're writing down how many total hours did you spend. And then of that, how many hours were I time, which I, again, equals indirectly productive. and I would write down how many hours did I spend prospecting. So what is my I time that I'm gonna do? So I would write down, and let's just say in this case, 3 hours was spent doing that. Then I want to keep track of how much time did I spend doing P time, or the productive, meaning on appointments, and let's just say it was 1. Then what you want to do, so at the end of every day, now you'll notice the reason that what's missing out of this?
Non.
Yeah, and the reason it's missing out of it is because anything that you do that is not indirectly productive or productive is non-productive. So you don't have to worry about keeping track, meaning total up your hours, because it's whatever's left over. So what was my N in this case? 6. So does that make sense? So if at the end of every day I can look at it, and you don't really need to even write this down, because you just know it's what's left over. Because here's what I'm telling you, and this is where this is so cool. If you will have and keep track of this, so that, let me change colors, emphasize. If these two added together, the I and the P time, should equal between 40 and 60% of your time. So these two activities together should equate to between 40 and 60% of your time, which means we're leaving then 40 to 60% of your time to be non-productive. And here's what I'm telling you. If you will do this and keep track, and at the end of every week, make sure that of your total hours worked, the I and the P added together equate to somewhere between 40 and 60%. So in this case, that would have been 40%. In that day, if I worked 10 hours, 3 was prospecting and 1 was productive, I would have 40% of my time being indirectly productive or productive. Now, the reason we combine them together is because you guys have already brought up, how do you get this? You have to prospect to get this. So if I have no appointments, what do I need to spend my time doing? 40 to 60% of it needs to be spent doing this, which allows for you to do these other things, to role play. Like, that's why I'm not saying this should be even these two added together is 100%. Really, if it's between 40 and 60, I'm allowing for 40 and 60% of the time to be this. But the moment you add this up and you drop below 40%, that sirens should be going off. Red flags are going up everywhere, letting you know that work expands to fill the time available for its completion, and you're not being very productive. Does that make sense? Okay? So once you understand this, now, once you start to get more of this going on, as this increases, this will probably decrease, but it's okay, because as long as both of these together are between 40 and 60% of your time, you're going to be okay. And it will take care of itself. Now, a lot of times people will ask me, how do I know when I need to hire an assistant? Here's how you know. You know you need to hire an assistant when you're tracking your time and you are hitting 60% between these two areas, and you're not being able to get your prospecting in. Meaning because you're having to, because of the amount of business you're doing is forcing you to do more of this, like to some extent, I would even call just some of this is just busy work, meaning negotiating the after the contract signed, like you're negotiating the due diligence and scheduling inspections and all of that kind of stuff. When you find you're having to do those kinds of things here and you're not able to do your prospecting, it's time to hire an assistant and pay them $30 an hour to do that, to free you up to do this. Because we didn't talk about this. Essentially, your prospecting time, if you did the same thing, so if you took the total hours you spent prospecting and divided that into your income at the end of the year, so if you kept track of this, at the end of the year, you'll be able to know what your billable hours are, but you would also be able to, because meaning you would say, here's how much money, so I made $5,000 off of this and I put 10 hours into it, I made $500 an hour. Well, how much time during that same time did you spend prospecting? And usually what you're gonna find is you're making somewhere between $125 to $250 an hour for prospecting. So again, if you understand this, you see how crazy it is to say I'm gonna go work on a flyer. I could pay somebody 20 or 30 bucks to make me a flyer, and I'll use that time to go generate 4 or 5 times that income by prospecting. Does that make sense? So if you, and I'm telling you, if you kept track, what you'll find is when you get your income at the end of the year, if you kept track of how many hours you spent prospecting all year, you're gonna find you're making 125 bucks an hour. That you're like, does that hopefully get you like excited to like, I gotta go make some phone calls, because an hour of doing that is generating me $125 every hour I do it. Good?
Yeah.
All right. So here's the cool thing with this. If you were to come to me and say, Russ, help me figure out and make more money in this business, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is in the next week, keep track of your time. Because I want to see where you're spending your time. When I know where you're spending your time, I know how to fix the problem. I can help you make whatever income you want based on that, because once we see what you're doing here, I'm going to then figure out, okay, what percentage of your time is between I and P time? And if what we find is that you're below 40% between I and P added together, your work is expanding to fill the time available for its complete. You're doing stuff you don't need to be doing. So let's cut that out and start you doing more of the prospecting. Now, what if, so here's what I found. If you are if I had somebody who you came to me, and this is where this is powerful, that I said I worry that you guys don't understand how powerful this is to help you. If you were doing this and you came to me and you said, okay, Russ, I prospected all week and I was at 40%, between 40 and 60% of my time was spent prospecting, and I got no appointments. What's the problem?
Call effectiveness.
Skills.
Yeah, it's a skill set issue. And specifically, the skill set is you're not asking for appointments. That is what I have learned. One of two things. If you came to me and you said, Russ, I've tracked my time, I'm not getting appointments, but I am spending at least 40% between I and P time, it's one of two things. Either number one, it's a skill set issue that we've got to help you, and typically that skill set is you're not asking for appointments. There's only 5 ways in the English language you can ask for appointments, and you're not asking for an appointment. You're saying, would you like to get together? How about we get together? Why don't we? You're saying something like that. So it's either that or you're lying to yourself in what you're writing on here. That's what I found. If you track this, it's one of two things. We either got to work on your skill set or you're lying, meaning you're saying, you're putting down that you prospected for 2 hours, but if we had a video camera, you were really spent half of that time chit-chatting with other agents, or like somebody getting on the, I got it. Like a lot of times, like on expireds, people will want to do all of this research on the property before they make the call. Well, I got to know what's going on. But they'll count that as prospecting. I'm prospecting, but you weren't. You spent that 40 minutes of the hour you were doing this stuff, meaning researching the property. That's not prospecting. So you're either lying to yourself or you need help on skills. Now, what about this? Let's say that you were tracking your time, and what you showed to me is that you had 40 to 60% eye time, and you were spending, let's say, half of this time, maybe not even half. Let's say that a quarter of the 40% is spent, or 60% is spent doing this, but you're not getting deals. What's the problem? So if you told me, yeah, I'm going out on these face-to-face appointments, but I'm just not there, no deals are coming out of it.
Weak presentation.
That's right.
Skill set again.
It's again either a weak presentation, your skills, or what I found, you're just not asking for the deal. Meaning like somebody, I've noticed people will go out on a presentation, and at the end of the presentation they'll go, so what do you think? And the person will say, yeah, let us think about it. Oh, okay. And then you leave. Like you're not asking for the deal. What do you think is not asking for the deal? Okay, you gotta close.
Okay, maybe this was a different question.
That's okay.
What would you consider like following up or like sending information to your lender? Would that be
Okay, good question. Thank you. That is the only thing we probably should have added down here under the prospecting and indirectly would be lead follow-up, which technically I'm kind of counting that as prospecting still, but thank you. I think it's worth separating those out, just saying lead follow. Lead follow-up would be considered indirectly productive because probably 70-80% of your business is going to come from the lead follow-up. Most of the time, you're not going to get the deal or get the appointment the very first time. It's going to take some lead follow-up. So yes, lead follow-up. Now, getting stuff to your lender, non-productive. So when you stop, which I'm telling you, I watch this stuff happen so much. I'm on the phone, I get a good lead that somebody, oh yeah, we've thought about it. Oh great, well I'm gonna have my lender call you. Great, then you stop, you run over to call the lender, and we spend all this time with talking to the lender, getting that all set up, and like, to me, that part of it is non-productive. Now, keep in mind, I'm still allowing for 40 to 60% of your day to be spent non-productively, and still saying to you, you can make a good income with your day being 40 to 60% non-productive. But the key is, are you keeping it to that? Because I'm telling you, most people are probably 70-80% of their day is non-productive. If you will keep track of it, it is eye-opening. When you track it, you will see, holy cow, I waste a lot of time. You will figure out you spend so much more time doing non-productive things than you think you are. And you'll want to try to justify them like we did about, well, Flyers is indirectly. No, it's not. If it's not on the phone, calling somebody, knocking on a door, setting an appointment, it's non-productive. Make sense? All right, questions? All right, let me give to you then. Who will do this? Keep track. Okay, good. I ask that every time, and then I ask this. Let me know what you found, and nobody ever lets me know. So let me know what you find. I'm telling you, if you will do this, it is eye-opening. So let me give to you now. Let me show you what your schedule should look like. Go ahead, Leslie.
A friend of mine who got into real estate last year gave me a desk planner, and it just folds open. It's the week, and it has in 15-minute increments. So I've been writing down, and I put little hash marks for how many
contacts or appointments,
how many dials I make, how
good.
many qualified contacts I'm making. So people who actually own a home and are willing and able to buy or sell, and then how many appointments are set.
Good job. That's awesome.
So I've been keeping those stats for a couple weeks now.
Good.
And you do notice that there are dead zones.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize it. You're like, oh well, I got sidetracked. I put something up on MLS or something. Then all of a sudden you went like 30 minutes without making a dial. You're like, oh shit. Where'd the time go?
Yep. Yeah. You're exactly. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that because that's exactly right. All right. So if I was going to put together the ideal schedule, now as we put together the schedule, recognize you may have to vary it a little bit based on your circumstances, but at the end of the day, the key thing is when you put together the schedule, make sure you are scheduling it in to allow for 40 to 60% of the time to be spent in I or P time, in either indirectly productive or productive time. Okay? Now, so when should my schedule start?
When you get your 8.
I would say earlier than that, before that.
When I get up.
I'd say before that.
When I go to bed.
And why? Yes, why should it be the night before?
So you're ready when you go the next day.
That's right, because here's what I found is usually people will say, oh, I'm going to get up and go exercise first thing in the morning, but then they stay up way too late at night, so then either they don't set their alarm for the time they were going to get up and exercise, or they do set their alarm, and then when it goes off, they go, oh, I don't feel like getting up, so they turn it off, and then they don't. Like, your schedule gets thrown off a lot of times based on what time you go to bed. So as you put together your schedule, decide for you, when do you need to be in bed in order for this date, the next day, to work out for you, okay? So think of it that way. It's going to start the night before. Then, so whatever time, whether it's 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a study done about successful people, and typically the top earning people wake up in the 5 o'clock hour. So my alarm's always set for 5:59, because that's still, I'm just kidding, because that's the 5 o'clock hour. But so typically people will get up at 5 a.m. to go do what?
Workout.
Yeah, usually. So
Exercise.
so I would say make sure that whatever time you're having it start, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever time it is, the things I'm going to just list here as like morning. The things that I think you should be doing as a morning thing is some form of exercise. What else should we do in the morning?
Eat breakfast. Drink your coffee.
Eat. Yeah, so eat breakfast, good. Caffeinate. Yeah, I just finished mine, almost finished mine. What else? Well, you should eat.
Meditate.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I think some form of, if you want to meditate, pray, whatever you want to call it, good. What else?
Read something.
Good. Some form of reading, or I'll do / listening. Either read to something or listen to something. One of the things you'll hear George talk about, if you haven't heard him before, is he always says, like, first thing in the morning, like as soon as he gets out of bed, he puts his headphones in to listen to something. Because he said the worst person to listen to first thing in the morning is who?
Yourself.
Yourself, yeah. So get out of your own head and get somebody else talking to you instead. Because what do you tell yourself when the alarm goes off?
I can see it.
Yeah, I don't want to get up. Oh, I can exercise later. I don't feel like it. It won't matter if I miss today, whatever. So reading, listening to something. The other thing I would throw into there then is going to be our daily message as well. The other one I'm going to throw in that you guys didn't bring up, which should be a given, but I'm going to say it anyway. Shower. Maybe I put in parentheses, don't stink, is really kind of what this is always my opportunity to bring this up. Like, I had, this is probably a month or two ago, but in a 1 week period, I had actually 3, but I did one of the, on Mondays we do the coaching call at 11. I did that the 1 week, and on there I was talking about some of this stuff, and I said, make sure you're showering, make sure you don't stink, because on that call I said, in that week, I said, I have stood and talked to 2 agents that while I was standing there talking to them, I was like, I could tell they hadn't showered for a couple days. Like, it was major BO.
What?
Like, seriously. And so,
Grown people?
yes, grown people. And so, I brought it up, and then people gave me all kinds of crap for, I can't believe you said take a shower. I'm like, well, it's true. But so then, a few days later, I won't tell you what office I went to, but I went to a different office. So I guess I just narrowed it down from this.
So it was warm.
But yeah, it was warm. No. So I go to, it wasn't, but I went to a different office, and I get in that office, and I'm standing there talking to an agent, and I'm like, okay, it's the smell of either she hadn't washed this person, shouldn't even point out the gender, but I already said she. Either her breath was really bad, or she hadn't washed her clothes, or just there was a stink. To some extent, we should all be willing, so I'm giving you guys permission. If you ever come and talk to me and I stink, please tell me. I'm getting bad. I would rather know. So anyway, just make sure you don't stink, okay? So shower. All right. The worst is probably when I say that and hear it, the people who need it the most are the ones who are probably yeah, he's not talking to me. Luke's over there. All right. So during the morning, you need to be doing that stuff. So then, what you should be doing, I would say, is then at 8 a.m., be here for morning ascent. And actually, I probably should even back up from that. 7:30, Rick has role play. So you got role play going on here, so you can get your role play in. From 8 so typically, morning ascent actually was supposed to be 8 to 8:30, but it never gets done that early. It's usually, even today I did it. And my goal is always, I want to be done by 8:30 so we can get people on the phone. And even today, I think it was 8:40. But so somewhere around between 8:40, but by 9 o'clock, prospecting. And I would say prospecting from 9, and I usually just say till noon. Now, recognizing, somebody brought up earlier of you need to take a break, and I'm 100% on board with that. Of during this prospecting, if you notice yourself having what I like to refer to as call fatigue, meaning you're dialing and you're energy's dropping, you got to do something to get the energy up. Whether it's stop, like Jason Carlson, one of the brokers here, used to talk about, like, he would call for, if I remember, it's either 45 or 50 minutes, and then he would stop and go walk around. Like, he would go out, walk past Famous Dave's, go walk around to get the energy back up, and then come back in and get back on the phone. Like, take a break, but again, make sure that break doesn't turn into, like Dustin said, 30, 40 minutes or whatever, or an hour. But every hour you should be taking 5 or a 10-minute break to get your energy back up again. So I've seen some people that have like a little trampoline or something, and they'll, be on there bouncing or stop and go up and down the stairs a few times, get your heart rate going. Because the worst thing you can do is on your call, you're calling and nobody's answering, calling, nobody's answering, calling, nobody answering. Finally they answer and you're like, "Hi, this is Russ." You don't want to say your house, do you? Because you're like so fatigued of dialing, right? Like, you need to have the energy up and ready to go. So I would say from 9 until noon is going to be your prospecting time. Then from noon to 1 you can do lunch, so we'll just throw lunch in there. 1 o'clock though, then should be a point. Well, you can vary this a little bit, but I usually say, I'm going to change it. Never mind. Sorry if you already wrote it down. 1 o'clock should be your lead follow-up time. So think of it as from 9 to noon is generating new business. 1 o'clock to 2 is I'm calling, doing lead follow-up, following up on the other leads and things. Now, in the event, like I know you're getting leads and stuff, you may end up doing some of your lead follow-up there too. But 1 to 2 o'clock, lead follow-up. 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock is now going to be appointment prep. Now, like I told you, I have watched so many times agents, and I'll go down there on the second floor in the pit area, and I'll watch an agent get on the phone calling for sale by owners. They'll get on the phone with a for sale by owner and schedule an appointment, and as soon as they schedule the appointment, they want to stop prospecting and go start prepping for the appointment. Don't do it. Stick to doing your prospecting rather than stopping. I better go look up this property. Like, you've got plenty of time to do it down here. So 2 to 3 is going to be your prep time. Then usually I would say 3 o'clock is going to be left open for appointments. 5 o'clock is open for appointments. And then what you want to do is and you just, again, you can decide the variation of this, but 1 or 2 days a week, have a slot open that you can do appointments like at 7. So let me show you what I mean. So like, you could decide on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll work until 8 o'clock. Meaning I'll go on appointments till 8 o'clock, but the rest of the time, I want to be home by 6 o'clock. So let me show you what that looks like. So let's say that you're a for sale by owner, I call, "Hey, when can we get together?" And you say,
Today.
Yeah, so I say afternoon or evening better for you.
Oh, evening.
Evening's better. Okay. So if I wanted to give her options, I would say, well, so evenings are better. Does 3 or 5 work better for you?
5.
Well, say 7.
Oh, 7.
So I don't get home from work till 6. I want to eat dinner. How about 7? Great. I've got spots on Tuesdays or Thursdays at 7. Which works better for you? Tuesday. So now I'm taking control of my schedule rather than letting them decide and forcing her going, "Oh, how about Wednesday at 7? No, Wednesdays. So Brian Burnett, which is our #1 agent, follows a schedule pretty similar to what this looks like you're seeing here. He holds 1 day of the week that he'll go on 7 o'clock appointments. The rest, he wants to be home by 6 o'clock. So making $1.4 million and he's home by 6 o'clock very rarely works on a Saturday. Yeah. But this is how he does it. So it's just you taking control. So when you're prospecting, you just say, "Here's when I have time available for appointments." So here's the key. Decide what that looks like and works for you on this appointments. If you decide, "Hey, I'm fine if I go till 8 o'clock every night," then great. Hold that as your slots. But decide how you're going to do that. Last year, down at the Mike Ferry Superstar Retreat in July, which is coming up again this July. Yeah, July 9th to the 12th. There's an agent down there. Which question?
No, I was just excited.
Oh, so there was an agent down there that she actually said she is home by 3 o'clock every day. She makes about $1 million a year, and she's home by 3 o'clock every day because she wants to be home when her kids get done with school. And how she does her schedule is she starts her prospecting. I don't remember if she started it before 8, but she starts it pretty early, and she only prospects for about 2 hours, and then she holds her appointments at 11 and 1. So she just tells people, here's when I'm available. And she was on a panel, and somebody asked the question of her, well, what do you do if somebody wants to meet at 4 or 5 o'clock? She said, I refer them out because that's not when I'm available. So I just find an agent in the office, which will work. Like if I today said to you guys, hey guys, I've got a listing appointment for tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Who wants it? Okay, so four of you raised your hand. What happened to the rest of you guys? You don't want it?
It was implied.
Oh, I just should know. Okay, so how much are you going to pay me for that appointment? What percentage?
30%.
1? Okay, you're not getting it. 30?
30.
Do I hear anybody 35? Okay, 35? 40? Like for real, this is what I would do.
Oh, I meant like one. I meant a different way. Yeah.
Oh, you meant
Like
so you were going to give me 33%.
Yeah.
But you're 35?
Yeah.
Okay. 40?
36.
30? Okay.
Whoa.
25.
Forget you. I'm going 36. 36 is the best I'm going to get
For
for
a listing appointment,
Yeah.
I'll give you 50%.
Okay, there we go. Now it's
We
back
got
to
a
Dustin.
deal.
Anybody else? Yeah. Dustin's like on Shark Tank. 50%, but you got to say right now, right? You got to make a decision right now. But notice that's what she does. Hey, I'm not going to work then. So 50%, great. I'm giving it to you. You got the appointment for tomorrow, and I can still be home at 3 o'clock. So does that make sense, though? Okay. What questions? I feel like I'm forgetting something. So you should have a question. And if you don't, then maybe I'm not forgetting anything. I guess not. So I guess let me just wrap it up today then with this. I would highly recommend I would highly recommend you do it in 15-minute increments at a minimum every half an hour though. Like my fear of even saying that to track it as a half an hour is you could spend 15 minutes out of that half an hour wasting your time, and then you'll say, oh, I was prospecting still that whole half an hour. So I love the fact, Dustin, that you've got it already broken down in the 15-minute increments, like because you already said, you'll see what he just said. If you track it, you'll notice, I already erased it, you'll notice, oh, I spent 15 minutes talking to somebody, and that's not really where I want to spend
Or
my
if
time.
you're on, I'll be on a call with prospect, and I'll notice that it takes up 3 lines.
Oh.
You're like, wow, that was a 40-minute phone call.
And if you get an appointment for it, could be okay.
Yeah.
Although usually what I would say is if that happens, you're handling objections over the phone that should be handled at an appointment. And meaning you could have probably, even if you
Right.
got the appointment, if you spent 30 minutes on the phone with that person, you probably were not being real effective with the call.
Yeah, and then you can try and figure out, did I spend too much time trying to build rapport?
Yep.
Was there a more
Exactly.
effective route to getting to
that.
the closing?
Perfect. Love it. Yeah.
One thing that I feel like is important in my schedule because I'm new is practicing.
In addition to the 7:30, or are you not coming to 7:30?
I am, but I feel like that's not enough.
Enough. Okay, and that's fine.
Well, the
Then-
12 steps.
And that's fine to still throw that somewhere else in here, and maybe because that's where I would thank you. That's what I was meaning to say that I see. I knew if you guys had asked the question, I would come back. So on with you, Barbara. My guess is you're not having appointments at
Yeah.
3 and 5 every day, which means you don't have appointments to prep for. So that's where I would say. So if you don't have appointments down here in this, what you need to do is do some more role play, which I think would be great, practicing here, and or go stop by, so drive by, knock on the door of some FSBOs or expireds, or even just call them, but during this time, go do some of that. Thank you for asking, because that was the piece I was going to say, is if you don't have appointments, doesn't mean you just go home. Instead, prospect more down here. Okay, any other questions? Awesome. Thanks for being here. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So 9 to noon prospecting, you're making calls. are you just blind calling random numbers down the phone book or specific?
Good question. Actually, I would recommend, so for me, here's how. NAR does a study every year, and I'll show you this in one of the other classes, a survey of home buyers and sellers. And what you will see on that survey is typically somewhere around 50% to even 60% of the way that people choose a buyer or a buyer's agent or a seller's agent is off of referrals. So for me, I feel like probably you should be spending, and this probably isn't realistic to say 50% of that time calling your SOI. But I would say you need to be calling between 3 and 5 at minimum people from your SOI during that time. And then outside of that, it almost doesn't matter who you call, but I would say for sale by owners, expireds, just listed, just sold, any of that. Like just, it honestly, I think it doesn't matter too much. Other than I guess you could say, if you think of it this way, there are 3 hurdles as far as a seller, well, a buyer too, but that we've got to get over. The first hurdle we've got to get over is what? Do they need to buy or sell?
Oh, okay.
That's the first hurdle. So let's just talk about sellers for a second. So the first hurdle I've got to get over is, do they need to sell? The second hurdle I need to get over is what?
Price.
Will they use an agent? And then the third hurdle is me. So first hurdle you got to get over is, do they need to buy or sell? Second is, will they use an agent? Third is me. Now let's stop and look. So when you asked who should I call, if I've got to get over these 3 hurdles, who would be people that we know need to sell or buy? FSBOs, because they're advertising, I need to sell my house.
Expired.
And expireds. And then to some extent, I would say, so just leads that come in. Okay. Now, does a for sale by owner need to sell? Yes. Will they use an agent?
Maybe.
That's right. But in their mind, they won't. So meaning with the for sale by owner, I've already cleared this hurdle. They need to sell. Now we got to clear the hurdle of, will they use an agent? And then the last one is, will they use me? What about an expired? Do they need to sell?
Yes.
Are they willing to use an agent?
Yes.
So the only hurdle I have left with an expired is what? So to some extent, I think for listings, for sale by owners and expireds are good because we already know they've cleared 1 or 2 of the hurdles. So I only got to clear 1 or 2 of the others. So, but honestly, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like if you want to do just listed or just sold calls, meaning just go or door knock. I personally, for me, I loved door knocking. I didn't really love it, but I liked it better than getting on the phone. That's probably the better way of saying it. It's not that I love door knocking. I liked it better than cold calls. So for me, I went out and knocked doors. If you like better being on the phone, then be on the phone. So either way, Shannon.
I'm the same as you, but I just closed had a closing. So the day before and the day after the closing, I went to all the neighbors and got 3. They're still prospects, but one's relocating in June. Another one is looking at list in March, and another one wanted me to call them in a month.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, when you close on one, so when you close on this one, I would highly recommend you do that. Go knock on doors and let them. Hey, I just had the buyer that bought this house here, and we know when one home sells, usually 2 or more will sell right away. When do you plan on moving? So, yeah, thank you, Shannon. So, great question, Lou. All right, anything else? Okay, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And
This
so,
was legit. Thank
you liked it?
Yeah.
Okay, so Thursday's class is the company foundation. So,
Oh, nice.
if you haven't been, be here, but I'll send an email tomorrow to let everyone know. So, okay, we'll see you on Thursday, if not before.